Hello, I'm Hugh Coakley from the Guildford Dragon News. We are delighted to have with us today an environmental campaigner, James Miller. At 19 years old, he's got an achievement list on his CV that most people don't get to write after a lifetime. He won the 2019 Humanities Award from the UK publisher Pearson's, where the wildlife campaigner, writer and broadcaster Dominic Dyer said of him, James is an extremely intelligent, articulate and visionary environmental campaigner whose initiatives from the age of 13 have driven real awareness on the threats facing our wildlife. I believe he has the potential to become, to be a figure of influence on the scale of Chris Packham or Sir David Attenborough. He co-founded the foreword to the 2019 State of Nature report compiled by conservation and government organisations in the UK. The foreword had previously been written by, again, Sir David Attenborough. He was one of the 5 UK delegates to the mock climate change conference, where the official conference had been delayed due to COVID. And he's now leading a project to mobilise young people ahead of COP26. He said, the climate summit is one of the most important political events in our lifetimes, a last-ditch attempt to set in place the policy that will implement the change we need over the next 10 years to keep within safe limits of warming. Welcome, James, and thank you for talking to the Guildford Dragon News.
And thanks so much for having me.
Right, James, you're a man on a mission. What started you off on this environmental work?
Well, I think it probably all started really from a love of nature and wildlife. I've always been into animals from a very young age, and I think that probably started watching people like Sir David Attenborough on television, travelling to far-flung corners of the earth, looking at all this incredible exotic wildlife. But actually, that changed when I started to become aware of all the amazing animals that we had right here on our doorstep, and then of the threats that those animals faced. And I realised that there was a real need to step up and to protect these things and to raise public awareness of the scale of the threats that they face. Because here in the UK, we are one of the worst countries for biodiversity. We're, I think, 189th of all countries in the world for our levels of biodiversity, which is pretty shocking, especially for a country that considers itself a country of animal lovers. And we missed 15 of our 19 global biodiversity targets this year. So we have a lot of work to do, and a lot of wildlife is on the brink. So it needs doing. It needs doing.
Right, so James, you started off filming documentaries and that sort of stuff, and you've moved into public speaking, organising and campaigning about climate change. Tell us about the projects you're working on now.
So right now I'm working, one of my favourite projects actually is I'm working with this organisation called Reserva Youth Land Trust. And what they're doing is they're creating the world's first entirely youth-funded nature reserve in Ecuador's Chocó rainforest, which is one of the most threatened rainforests in South America. It's experiencing extraordinarily high levels of deforestation. And what this organization has done is it's brought together young people from all around the world, more than 50 young people, and together we're fundraising to protect that rainforest, to actually buy the plots of land and pay forest guards to protect it. And I think that's one of the most extraordinary and inspiring projects I've ever been a part of. So that's something I'm working on at the moment and will be for the next year. I'm also helping to mobilize young people ahead of COP26, which is this summit that you mentioned next year, which is going to be one of the most important events in our lifetime, when we're going to gather all the global leaders in the world to try to review our carbon targets for the next 10 years and have this final attempt to raise our level of ambition to an extent that will keep us within safe warming. So it's really important that we have a whole society mobilization ahead of that summit to put the political pressure on our leaders. And I'm hoping to work with the young people on that and the huge climate movement here in the UK.
Do you see a difference between attitudes of young people and old people towards the environment and climate change and so on?
Well, I think I do. I think there's been obviously a huge display of concern from young people in the UK and around the world in the last few years, in the form of the climate strikes, in terms of millions of people going out on the streets, and showing that this is something that they care strongly about, and that's had huge impacts on public policy, in terms of the net zero target that Theresa May set in public policy a couple of years ago. Now, unfortunately, with COVID, and perhaps other factors as well, that seems to have fallen slightly off the agenda, I think, for young people. And I don't know whether that's because this has been a phase that's come in and is its time is over. But what I'm hoping is that when there is light at the end of the tunnel now, and when we come out of this COVID situation, that young people will be back out on the streets. I haven't seen that as much from older generations, but I'm hoping that that message is getting through and that young people are setting an example that older people will follow now.
Why do you think there is that difference? You know, there has been a tradition of people campaigning, you know, the Greenpeace, the Green Party, and so on. Do you think the climate strike, you know, the youth strike, do you think that was different from those campaigns in the past?
I don't know. I always thought that it was, and I thought that the scale of mobilization that we've seen was unprecedented. But then a couple of months ago, I heard about these Earth Day protests that were held in America many years ago, and how that they filled an entire city, and you could see all the way down the streets just blocks of people protesting for exactly the same things that we are today. So I always thought that we were the first to do stuff on this scale, but maybe we weren't. But I don't think that it's ever had such a deep, profound effect on society across the world as the strikes that we've had in the last few years have.
Yeah, I often hear people say to me, don't tell me any more about the environment, you know, it's just, I can't do anything, it's too huge. People are, it's almost like thinking of space and infinity. It's just too big a question. Should people be hopeful? Should people be despairing?
I don't think people should ever despair. I think despair is such an easy excuse for inaction, and I think even though it can sometimes be a lot harder, it's really important to keep that sense of optimism. Now is the worst time to give up, because now we're having exponential rates of destruction on the planet. Things are getting worse and worse, but we're also having an exponential rate of action, and in terms of the commitments being made by countries, and the way society is progressing in terms of technology with electric vehicles, and decisions people are making in terms of their daily choices. So now is a crucial moment for everyone to be hopeful and to take action themselves and use whatever spheres of influence they have to push for change. Now is not the time for despair.
No, it's not the time. Dare I have an opinion? I agree. I see that you know, you started off at 13 doing documentaries. What's your favourite documentary that you produced?
That I've produced? Oh, I don't know. There was one I made about ruby-tailed wasps when I was a lot younger that I really liked, because it had some dare I say it had some quite nice macro shots in it of some beautiful tiny little creatures that lived in my front wall that I had no idea about. I had no idea they existed until one day I was just walking out the front door and I saw this little gem of green flicker past my eyesight, and they're these beautiful tiny little wasps. People think that we only have one species of wasp here in the UK, that it's got yellow and black stripes, that it stings you and it annoys you at picnics, but we have over 9,000 in all different shapes and sizes and colours, and this is one of the most beautiful kinds, and it has a fascinating life story. So that was a real pleasure to tell that story.
It was there in your back garden, in your house.
right there in my back garden, and probably in many other people's too in this area
Yeah,
as
yeah,
well.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
In reading your website, James, I don't see any particular. You've talked about wasps there. I don't see any particular species or area that really has taken you. Is your interest in nature general, or is there a particular animal or a particular plant that fascinates you that you'd love to know more about?
It is pretty general. It's pretty general, but I do have a couple of favourites. I think if I had to pick one, it would be the badger. I absolutely love badgers. I first saw them maybe 6 or 7 years ago when my neighbour took me out to our local woods to show me the badger set, and then I would go there every night. And they're just such beautiful animals, and I think the appeal in them is that you go out at night and it's a completely different world, and you see the same in the day overrun by a completely different set of life that most people don't realize is there. And is that mystery, I think, that's so appealing.
James, last question. We mentioned Sir David Attenborough, and you appear to be linked to him in many respects, in many sort of, when people talk about you. Is that a hint? Is that a help or a hindrance to what you're hoping to do?
I firstly I take that as a huge compliment, but I think that that's probably an asset. I mean, I want to be myself, and I think there are a couple of things that I would do differently to Sir David. I think he's done an incredible job in what he's done in raising awareness of the beauty and the wonder of the natural world and inspiring so many successive generations, which is incredible, really, because most television presenters, they have their influence over one group of people, and then the next generation aren't even aware that they exist. But David Attenborough, it seems that each successive generation loves him more and more. So I think he's done an incredible job there. But I think as he and the BBC are now realizing, there needs to be a transition, I think, to a different kind of filmmaking, probably with a greater focus on the issues that are facing wildlife and climate. And that's what they're starting to do now. But I think I see my role probably more as tilting towards that and what politicians and society can do to combat these crises.
James Miller, thank you very much for talking today to the Guildford Dragon News.
Thanks very much for having me. Thank you.